Welcome back to another episode of the Bleav in Georgia Tech podcast. We are your co-host. That is RJ Schaefer. I am Jackson Caldwell, and now we are officially on the right side, so we can start this podcast for real this time. And yes, I'm sure for anybody listening to the last episode, you are glad I'm not in State Farm Arena with noise distracting you and irritating you. So yes, you're welcome for that. But yeah, coming to you on Friday, January 19th here in the afternoon, our usual time. RJ is coming off a big win for the Packers. He's nervous for tomorrow, but he's locked and ready for today.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean we got kind of a slow news week, but you know.
Hey, it's never a slow news week when it comes to Georgia Tech. Notching a big win in basketball, have another big game tomorrow in Atlanta. Have plenty to talk about there. But yeah, I mean, we'll just dive right into it. So it was funny. When me and RJ were on here last, we were talking about the new hires of Kyle Pope as the outside linebackers coach coming over from Memphis. We'd already touched on Jess Simpson coming over. He was a co-defensive coordinator at Duke. Also had been previously the defensive line coach at Miami and the Atlanta Falcons. So we also touched on defense coordinator should be coming at some point. You know, Brent Key was on 680 The Fan, the radio station, and saying that he had hoped to have the defensive coaching staff hires in place and ready to go in a few days. And what do you know? Just a few hours after me and RJ get off the air, former Duke co-defensive coordinator Tyler I believe it's pronounced Santucci. I apologize if that's wrong, but he was hired as a new defense coordinator. That had been rumored for quite a while, actually. There had been some other names thrown around there, but his name was kind of prominent. He's a younger guy. He was co-defense coordinator at Duke. Like I said, he has previous experience at Texas A&M, Wake Forest, Notre Dame. He kind of followed Mike Elko wherever he went, and like Mike Elko's been he was a really good defense coordinator for years at all those stops: Notre Dame, Wake Forest, and Texas A&M before getting the head coaching job at Duke, where he did a really good job, and is obviously now back at Texas A&M. But like a little bit to my surprise, and I'll admit I don't know the full backstory here. Elko didn't bring him with him. He hired Florida assistant Jay Bateman, defensive coordinator at Texas A&M. So that left Tyler out on the market, and Brent Key come in and scooped him up. Duke was one of the best defenses in the ACC this past year, and really for the past 2 years. So I'll take you back a couple years ago to David Cutcliffe's final season. Duke was one of the worst defenses at a Power 5 level or Division I level that I had ever seen before. Now, I think obviously Elko deserves a lot of credit for that. I think one negative you might say about this hire is, okay, how much did Elko really have his hands on the defense? Like, was the defense mostly his credit, or did Santucci have a lot of credit in that as well? But Duke was instantly better on defense right away. And like, you have to think about it. Duke and Georgia Tech recruit similar caliber players. And that's not to knock anything, but neither Duke or Georgia Tech are filled with 5 stars on the defensive side of the football. Like that's just a fact. So I like the hire. You have to recruit a certain way at Duke, like you have to recruit a certain way at Georgia Tech. So, I'll never give up most hires. I'm not even A+, just because there's always unknowns when somebody goes to a different place. Like it can just be a different things going on. But I'd give it an A-. Like, just want to get your thoughts on it. And, what did you think literally hours after we got off the air last Friday?
Yeah, I'd say a similar thing. And if you look at Duke's defense last year statistically, the best scoring defense in the ACC and 16th nationally. Obviously, we don't know how much control he had over that defense, but I would be in the same area as you. I would give this a B+ higher. I think there's a ton of upside. A guy that's, been to a lot of places. I'm just kind of curious what it'll look like with his hands in the reign of the defense.
Yeah, I mean, just like you were saying, there's just all kinds of different factors going into it, and this is the one big thing going into next year, assuming that the offense stays at the same level or even gets better. Assuming Tech's offense doesn't, take a big step back or anything like that, the defense is the most crucial part to the 2024 season. If Tech's defense is the same as it was last year, good luck. because like the schedule is very very hard, and like it normally is. But even with Clemson off the schedule next year, you're talking about games against Georgia, a game against Notre Dame, Miami, Florida State, NC State, Louisville. All those teams are expected um, to compete for the ACC, or in Georgia and Notre Dame's case for bigger things like a playoff spot and probably a national championship as well, at least if you're Georgia. So look, the schedule is going to be tough, and the defense is just going to have to be better. Whether it's run defense, I think is obviously the thing that stands out to most everyone. But the secondary had its ups and downs too. I think some of that can be correlated to the front seven and lack of pass rush. And they're having to replace several players on the defense. But them coming in, I'm interested to see a coaching upgrade. And look, he's obviously had tons of experience with Simpson, coaching together at Duke for past couple of seasons. Kyle Pope, he seems to be an up and comer in this business as well. I'm excited to see what he's doing. And all these coaches, like if you want to see how crazy like a calendar it is for college football, these coaches are just already out recruiting. Like obviously Simpson had kind of been in the works for a while, but I know Tyler was out seeing Jonte Gilbert just yesterday, probably their top target on defense for 2025. So obviously things are going to have to be different on that side of the ball. And honestly, there's nowhere to go up. Like, I know I sound like rude saying that, but like look at a lot of the statistics, and it's just like it would be hard for Georgia Tech to be worse on that side of the ball. But for them to really possibly challenge to be in the top half of the ACC, which I honestly think they're capable of doing with the offense that they have, you're going to need to see pretty big jumps everywhere, and that'll be the most interesting thing for me. But do you have anything else on the new defensive coordinator hire?
No, I just think there's not much to speculate. I really want to see it in action, and then I think
Mhm.
I'll give a regrade at that point.
Yeah, and you're going to see a completely like a revamped Georgia Tech defense going against a revamped Florida State offense, like right off the bat. And you're going to be challenged. Like I know that and we don't have to obviously dig in too much into this right now. We're 7 months away, literally. But Mike Norvell is one of the best players in all of college football. Florida State still has talent and has weapons on that side of the ball. It'll be interesting to see how they handle that, because for the most part last year, and until kind of in the second half, because their offense couldn't do anything, Duke's defense did a really good job against a very, very good, healthy Florida State team when they still had Jordan Travis, Keon Coleman, Johnny Wilson, all those guys. Like Duke's defense did a pretty solid job, not a tremendous job, but they did a really good job given their talent going up against that Florida State offense. So I'll just be interested to see how they match up with Mike Norvell and Seminoles, but that will be at a later date when we dive more into that. When we were talking last week, we were discussing some of the problems we thought were going on with basketball. And, we said we didn't think it was a disaster, and that they were close in several games. You blew a 16-point lead to Boston College. You went to overtime with Notre Dame. And then, it was a tough going, but, really when we got off the next day, we previewed the Duke game last week. We both didn't like Georgia Tech's chances, but they were up 10 in the second half in Cameron Indoor Stadium, which is arguably the toughest place to play in all of college basketball. I was obviously covering it, and I thought they were going to win. I really did. Like they outplayed Duke in several categories. They shot better than Duke. I think the free throw attempts, I think some of the officiating was a little spotty. Obviously, it doesn't all come down to that. I'm not going to be that guy, but the free throw attempts did lean heavily in Duke's favor, and they almost pulled off like an improbable second win against Duke. And then Tuesday, 9 with like a minute and 20 left, Nate George, like he had the game of his life. I believe Tuesday against Clemson, went to double overtime. Look, you can blame Clemson for not hitting hardly any 3-pointers. I think they wound up shooting 14% on threes. You can blame them for not hitting their clutch free throws. But at the end of the day, Georgia Tech made the clutch shots at the end of the game, whether it was George, whether it was Reeves. They all stepped up when they needed to. Like that was a huge win on this week.
Yeah, and I really want to talk about Nate George, because it's kind of been like these past 3 games a progressive increase in output. You look at Georgia Tech, obviously one of the highest pick and roll teams in the ACC. I believe we're at number 1 right now. 43% of possessions is pick and roll. And I think Nate George works off of that so beautifully. He's able to, find space anywhere, drive to the basket. Obviously, there weren't many fouls in that game, but when there were, it was Nate George getting to the basket, getting a foul. Um, I think really we saw the emergence of Miles Kelly earlier. He had a slump, he came back. I think now we see the emergence of Nate George. Having such a young team, you have multiple guys stepping up at multiple times, and I think that's something for us to look forward.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you. And, there were some early signs in the game where I was worried how it was going to go, but neither team really pulled out in front, like, because Clemson was absolutely killing Georgia Tech on the glass early. And Georgia Tech's one of the better rebounding teams, whether it's by Ndongo or somebody else. Like, they're a pretty good rebounding team, but man, Clemson was really killing it on the glass. PJ Hall had a big game for them. I think he wound up having like 28 points, if I'm not mistaken. But just a big win. And like, Clemson has trailed off this at this point in the season, like because they started off like 11-1, I think, and were ranked number 16 at one point. And in the latest bracketology I saw on ESPN, they were a projected number 5 seed. Like beating them on the road is still. We'll see how they end up at the end of the year. Maybe they were just a complete fraud from the beginning. That's possible. But going and beating a team that many think can contend in the ACC, or at least one of the upper tier teams in the ACC, that's a pretty big deal. And especially it was finally good to see them close the game out. Like we said, they've been in every single game outside of maybe the Cincinnati game earlier in the year, but especially since ACC play started. They got the win over Duke, and then you had close losses to Florida State, Boston College, Notre Dame, and Duke as well, the second game around. And they could have won all those games. Like it was good to see them close the deal. Nate George was obviously huge, and they're going to have a tough task ahead of them tomorrow. Or I guess at least you would think it was a tough task if you just look at the name. But Virginia, who came into the year ranked, and they have been terrible as of late. Like, I'll just put that nicely. They did get a win over their arch rival Virginia Tech this week, but they were blown out by Notre Dame. They've been blown out in a lot of ACC, or in a few ACC games, I guess is the best way to say it. And Georgia Tech has an opportunity to string some wins together, because here's the crazy part in all this. Georgia Tech lost several games in a row. They're like a winning, stringing a few wins together away from being in like 5th place in the ACC, because there's just not a lot of separation right now. I think everybody would agree that North Carolina is the upper tier team right now. Like they look kind of scary right now. And I said, I wrote a couple weeks ago when I was previewing a game, or I think I was power ranking all the teams in the ACC. I said, if there's a national title contender in the ACC, it's probably North Carolina. They're probably the best team, and they've showed it. Like they've looked incredible. They've won all their games, ACC games, by double digits, I believe, except for their first game against Florida State, who's actually playing well right now. But it appears North Carolina and Duke have kind of separated themselves a little bit. And then you've kind of got a weird mixture of NC State, Wake Forest, and even Florida State, who's won like 5 in a row right now. Then there's a drop off. I don't really know who's good or who's not. Clemson is struggling. Miami has not lived up to the preseason hype, which that figures. But a lot of teams just not being very good. Like Pitt's not very good. Boston College isn't very good. Notre Dame's not very good. And I know Tech's lost to some of them, but man, it's kind of crazy that they're not totally out of it for being. I don't know that they're going to finish in the bottom half of the ACC. Do you?
I don't think so. And one interesting thing about the Virginia game, um, which I thought was really interesting, Georgia Tech is 0-10 in their past 10 games against Virginia. They haven't beat Virginia since January of 2016, which is really insane. But it in regards to the ACC, I don't think it's unrealistic to say, you finished top 5, top 4 in the ACC, just because, like you said, there's so much parity. Like,
Yeah. And
you
I'm
look
not
at the
saying
top.
they're going to. I'm just saying, like, who's like, okay, North Carolina aside, like I was gonna lump Duke in with that group, but like Georgia Tech's not scared of Duke. Like they beat them once, and they should have beat them twice. Like there's just nobody that's I know Damon Stoudemire. He was on the radio today talking about how people are saying it's a down year for the ACC. He didn't believe that. It's a really tough league, and I mean, I would probably disagree with him. Compared to previous years, I think this year's it's pretty down, and I think that leaves the door open for them to climb further. There's not many teams that are a lot better than each other, and there's not many teams that are worse than each other. So every game going into it, I'll say Georgia Tech might have a chance to win. Like they definitely have a chance to beat Virginia tomorrow. There's no doubt in my mind.
Yeah, and that kind of sets, a precedent for the team. That's got to be, motivational for the team because you look, like you said, it's not far. Obviously, not to the top because there's a few teams like, North Carolina, Duke. I would put NC State kind of in that area. Um, but, being in the top tier of ACC, I think right now the overall reception of Georgia Tech is like, you're a bottom tier ACC team or whatever.
Mhm.
But I don't necessarily think that's true. I think there's a ton of winnable games left on the schedule, and I think you leave opportunities for yourself ahead.
Yeah, and I saw everybody. I'm pretty sure knows Stanford Steve over at ESPN. He said he had a random thought the other day, and he said Georgia Tech's the best 9-8 team in the country. Which it's I don't really know how you quantify that because you're 9-8 for a reason. Maybe they are. I don't really have a list of all the 9-8 teams, but I do think it shows they're a scrappy team that has gotten better, and they're not an easy out for anybody in the ACC. And look, they have a very winnable game tomorrow. I was going to piggyback off what you said. Not only has Tech lost the last 10 to Virginia, it's been 18 of 20. Like that's kind of crazy to think about a series being so lopsided, but you kind of think, and that's why leading into this, I said it looks like a really tough game if you just look at the name of the opponent. Like when everybody thinks of Virginia, they think of just the defense, Tony Bennett being a really good coach. They won that national championship. They have not been the same team the past couple of years. Like it's not even been close. And I haven't followed every single Virginia game this year, but like I said, they've been getting blown out in quite a few games this year. And I'm interested to see how they match up. I think obviously you worry about the pace of the game and how Virginia wants to play it. They play slow. There's probably not going to be a ton of points scored, even though Georgia Tech has actually gotten to be one of the better offenses in the ACC this year. Like if they're shooting really well right now, they're averaging 78.3 points per game, hitting 47.8% of their shots. That's number 2 and number 1 in the ACC in those categories. Now, that's obviously going to be a challenge tomorrow, and they're going to have to take the opportunities that are given to them. And they're going to have, I think, turnovers and possibly free throw shooting are just going to be huge deals tomorrow because of just the way Virginia plays. And the thing is, Virginia they don't have a real offensive threat in my opinion. I just wonder how it's just a different style of basketball than you're used to seeing when you play other teams. Like it's just a different thing. It's a little bit like when Syracuse had the zone defense under Jim Boeheim. Like that was something different that nobody else ran that you had to really prepare for, and it was a pain to play. That's how I think about Virginia now, maybe to a little bit of a lesser level, but I think they win tomorrow. I really do.
Yeah, I do too, and I think one of the keys to the game, like how you said, turnovers. I think getting to the line is so crucial. Because look at the Duke game, say whatever you want about officiating as always. Um, but there was one point in the game Duke had taken 6 throws, Georgia Tech had taken 2. And then we missed the next 2 shots, so we were 1 of 4 from the free throw line. Duke was, I think, 14 of 16 from free throw. So I think a lot of that is just, attacking the rim, um, obviously finding guys in space. But a lot of that is just drawing fouls. That's all it is.
Well, and some of that, obviously when they've become a 3-point shooting team
Yeah.
a lot here lately. So you're obviously going to see some decrease in free throw shooting. Like keep that in mind. Like, and when you're shooting it as well as they are, like that makes perfect sense. But Virginia has also not won a road game this year, which is kind of crazy to think about. They've lost all 3 ACC road games, and they lost a non-conference road game earlier this year. But I can't. It's hard to predict final scores. I think whoever gets to 65 to 70 probably wins. I think that's what it's probably going to take. It wouldn't surprise me if it's both the winning team scores in the low 60s, but I'm going to pick Tech to win it. And of course, I'm sure that'll come back to bite me.
Yeah, I'm gonna do the same thing, but I'm gonna give a score out there. I'm gonna say Tech 68, Virginia 62.
62. Okay. We'll see. We will be back to cover it all next Friday, of course. And unless there's some breaking news we need to cover. That'll be the thing. But yeah, if you're watching this, before we get out of here, if you're watching this on YouTube, be sure like the video, subscribe to the channel. We would appreciate it. If you're listening in podcast form, make sure you give us a rating. Tell us your thoughts in the comments. What we can do better. What you would like to see on the show. And like we always tell you, we want to hear back from everybody. We love the feedback. We want to build this for the community of Georgia Tech fans, and we want to do it in the best way possible. So any feedback is good feedback for us. And yeah, RJ, you got anything else, man?
You said it all.
All right, I'm putting you on the spot right now. Does Green Bay beat San Francisco tomorrow?
Yes.
Okay, I'm holding you to that because I'm gonna go. You know what? I can't host a podcast with somebody and not like just support them. I have nothing against Green Bay. Go Packers. Uh, I do have a future on the Baltimore Ravens, so I'm going to be an unapologetic Ravens fan for the next few weeks and hoping I can cash in on that. But in terms of the Packers, go Pack, go. But that's going to do it for us. Like I said, if what you got something?
I wanna put a prediction out there. I'm gonna say Jordan Love 350 passing yards, Aaron Jones 3 touchdowns. Packers win by 10.
Okay, we I don't have nothing to add to that. So yeah, if you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe. You listen on podcast form, be sure to subscribe. Let us know what you think. That's going to do it for us. That is RJ Schaefer. This is Jackson Caldwell. Thank you for listening to the Bleav in Georgia Tech podcast.